Hey everyone, Model Man Frank here. Welcome to the channel. Hope you can all hear me. Yep, y'all can hear me. Welcome to the channel. And today, no technical difficulties. I'm able to talk clear, and we have everything going on just the way it's supposed to be, and so on. This podcast is about the Havilland Aircraft. We started talking. There were just too many aircraft to talk about. This is a second one. But first, I wanted to explain to you guys a little bit. We're starting a Patreon page. I'll be doing exclusive stuff that I'm not like longer format videos of this very podcast. I'll cut and I'll actually paste some of the aircraft that we actually speak about. It'll be a little bit more. You'll be able to see things that you won't be able to see here. It's $5 to join per month, and you're able to see a little bit more content on there than you will be able to see on YouTube. We're at that point, and it helps me out to bring more stuff to you guys, and things that I can't really post on here, I can post on Patreon, and you can get a little bit more on there, and some links and things like that. So if you want to follow me on Patreon, it's Model Man Frank, and just take a look. It's a donation of $5 once a month, and you'll be able to see things that uncut videos that I don't put on YouTube. Okay. Moving along, because it is a lot of planes to talk about, because in the news today, actually, just real quick, I don't think it was today. I think it was a couple of days ago. Another 727 crashed. All the occupants made it out, but the plane was a total loss. Plane broke up in a couple of pieces. It was in Africa. The aircraft was doing a humanitarian delivery, and it hit another parked aircraft that actually crashed the week before. So they hadn't gotten the plane out of the way. So when this plane came in for a landing, it hit the plane that crashed the week before. Now there's a pile at the end of the runway. So I think they're going to have to choose a different area to land airplanes at, because there's just way too many airplanes. And Luma was in Africa. But yeah, the 727 was a total write-off, but everybody got out alive, and it was on aviationsafety.com. So the aircraft is a total write-off. Another 727 bites the dust. It's kind of sad to see that the 727 is gone, but I am going to have a podcast about Boeing aircraft, and it's going to be about Boeing airliners specifically, because I grew up in the 1980s and late 70s, 80s, and 90s, when Boeing was pretty much at their height when it came to airliners. And that will be on our next podcast. So tonight, the Havilland Part 2. We spoke about last week about the different aircraft that the Havilland made. I think we ended with the Havilland Hornet, the DH-103 Hornet, and the Sea Hornet. The Sea Hornet and the Hornet were the single-seat version, same aircraft, same build style as the Mosquito, but it was an all-wooden aircraft. Again, same build style. It was single-seat. It wasn't really much of a bomber, but they made it kind of like that. They also made the Sea Hornet, where it was a Mosquito that would actually fold wings, but a single seat in the middle. I'll show you a real quick picture in my book here. Like I said, books are the best because the information inside a book is raw. Hello, EQRC. How are you today? So that is the Sea Hornet. If you want to build a model of it, this is a pretty cool airplane to build. there's not many. There's no flying examples of them anywhere. So you'd be a pretty popular guy at the model airplane field if you built one of these, put it in the air. There are some plans out there. I think that on Outer Zone, if you go on Outer Zone, there are model airplane plans on there for the Sea Hornet. The aircraft itself had 420 millimeter cannons in the nose, plus 2,000 pounds of bombs or rockets under the wings. The bomb bay itself would be just used for fuel. The airplane, you had two thirsty Merlin engines going through there. As much fuel as you could get, you could make it a long-range fighter. And it came out too late before the war ended. It came out after the war ended. So it wasn't really used too much. It started to see some action in Korea, but by the 1950s, late 50s, early 60s, they were already phased out. There were just not many of them left. We were going from the Sea Hornet. British aviation was moving into the Vampire. Roadman Through Reality had actually found a link of a woman that she was one that actually broke a couple of records in the Vampire. The Vampire was a revolutionary design. It was basically, if you look at the P-38, imagine the P-38 with a jet engine on it. That's what the Vampire was. The power plant was a 3,350 pound thrust DH Goblin 3 turbojet. The aircraft, the dimensions of the plane were 38 feet in length, and it was, excuse me, my phone was loud. Where was I? Sorry. Dimensions were 38 feet in length, 30 inches in height. Oh, I'm sorry, 30 feet. Oh, the height was only 8 feet tall. So the airplane from the ground to the top of the wing, top of the tail was 8 feet. The width of the wings was 30 feet. So, wingspan was 38 feet. Length was 30 feet. My mistake. Armament was 20 millimeter cannons and provisions and stores and things like that under the wing. It was a twin boom design with that horizontal stabilizer in the back, and then the engine, the rear stabilizer was up a little bit, and the motor was right below it. Here's a photo of it. So, see it right here. It's pretty revolutionary design for the time, and the aircraft really held its own. It was used in Korea as mostly a strafing aircraft. It was a NATO war that was in Korea going on. The aircraft, Switzerland was using theirs up until 1990. So the aircraft, the Vampire came out. Wow. The very first one flew in the 1940s. Specifically, the DH-100 was the UK's single-engine fighter, the prototype flying at Hatfield on 29 September 1943. What was going on in 1943? World War II was still going on. Can you imagine if the aircraft had actually come out during the war? It would have made a big difference. It probably would have ended the war a lot quicker because we would have been in the air, maybe have gotten into a couple of fights with it. It had swept back wings. I mean, not completely, but you did have a little bit of a sweep, not like the ME-262. Would it have been able to do really well in a dogfight with the ME-262? We have no idea. It's all speculation. I think at that point in time, it's based on the pilot and not on the machine. The ME-262 had a lot of problems, a lot of teething problems, even in combat. And early gen engines, they sucked a lot of fuel, you know. They needed kerosene. It was kerosene, and then there was oil that needed to be mixed and things like that. And ME-262s, the motor, I think, was a 10-hour flight. After 10 hours of flying, boom, the engine had to be overhauled because it was unproven technology being rushed into service to fight the war. So, moving on. Our next aircraft, the Havilland Dove. The Havilland built an airplane. It was their first medium-range airliner to compete against the DC-3 and the C-40, C-47, the C-45. All the DC-3, C-47s were coming out, and they were becoming airliners. So de Havilland came up with a 400 horsepower Gypsy Queen 73 inline piston engine. They never saw air-to-air combat. If they had, it would have been a great it would have been pretty cool to watch. Yeah, no, they never saw air combat. But again, it would have been an interesting dogfight. I know it would be one-sided if they got into a dogfight with a MiG-15, because the MiG-15 would have just, that would be the end of it. But they never really saw combat. They were always used closer to home. They were used on training flights and things like that. You were training in that before you got into other airplanes. I'm sorry, the aircraft that was used more extensively in Korea was the Sea Furies. They were used there, and the Royal Australian Air Force used the Sea Fury there also. But that's a different company. So we're talking about de Havilland today. So, the DH-105 Dove. I'm sorry, 104 Dove. There were different variants. There was the 1, the 2, 1B, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6B, 7. And it was just basically the engine was the same, just different stuff they had on the plane. So the aircraft, that's your Dove right there. And what made it unique was that little, little hat on the top of the cockpit gave the pilot a lot of room. So you were sitting above. I actually saw one in Paris, and they had it at a museum, and you actually stepped up into the cockpit. So you had a little stairs that you got up into the cockpit, and the cockpit was on top. It had like a little bulbous, just like the 747, but you didn't have passengers sitting there. You had the pilot sitting up there. So 330 horsepower each engine. That's 660 horses. They were 3-blade, and there were 2 blades. 2-blade aircraft came out when it first arrived, and then the 3-bladed came out when production started. So yesterday we were talking about the de Havilland 106 Air Comet. I'm sorry, last week we were talking about it. And we had spoken about the Comet and why is it they were the very first. De Havilland was the first company to actually create an airliner. They had actually beat Boeing, the 707, out to the production field and actually developed the airliner. They were starting to do flights. People would be able to fly at 40,000 feet above all the bumps and the rattlings, and they were able to sit in air conditioned comfort and fly in the stratosphere high above the clouds and see beautiful blue skies everywhere, as we are able to see now. Yeah, you still had turbulence when you went over the ground, but it was relatively a pretty you were flying in a really fast aircraft. Cruising speed was 503 miles per hour. Cruising altitude was 42,000 feet. So you're all the way up there above the clouds, where in a DC-6 or a DC-7 piston driven aircraft, you were flying between 10 and 11, maybe 12,000 feet, mostly 10,000 feet. And a DC-3, you were flying, the highest you were going was 10,000 feet. Any higher than that, you had to start breathing oxygen, and you needed air because you get hypoxia as you get higher and higher. So the problem is that the Comet had a fatal flaw. There were quite a number of accidents with the aircraft, and no one could figure out what was going on. The planes were breaking up in flight and killing passengers, killing the entire crew and passengers. They had to ground the whole fleet. So British Overseas Airways, who was one of the main customers, which British Overseas Air Service later became British Airways. Also, the whole fleet basically was grounded. So when that happened, they just couldn't figure out what. They tried so many other aspects. As they started pulling wreckage out of the water and out of areas where the plane had crashed, they kind of thought, air investigation was still in its infancy when it came to this crash. It was hard to really determine what happened. I did a video a while ago about Fokker, the difference between the Fokker tri-motors and the Ford tri-motors. And it was the old airliners. The Ford tri-motor, everybody knows what the Ford tri-motor was really very first airliner out there. It was known as the Tin Goose. But before them, when they were flying, the Fokkers were flying, and Fokker was also having problems later on in its time cycle of the Fokker. The Fokker was built out of wood, where the tri-motor was built out of all aluminum, corrugated metal, where the Fokker was not. Fokker was built out of aluminum, but it was also had wood construction. Again, infancy of air investigation, because of dedicated people that were trying to find the problem. They later found out that it was the Fokker that was having a problem. The reason it wasn't having a problem was the wood trusses that held the wing onto the fuselage actually would rust, and the wood would rot, and the wings were just flying right off and killing people. Back to the Havilland. The air investigation crews that were working on these investigations and trying to figure out what was going on with these planes, they developed a very interesting way of doing it. They took a DH-106 and built a water tank around it. They built it, sealed it, and then filled the water up. And then using a series of wires and things like that, they actually put the airplane through cycles of pressurization, because they kind of had a hint what was going on, because they would find little hairline cracks around the windows, but they didn't know if it was actually that. So that's why they built this water tank. So they built the water tank, they filled the water up. Aircraft is submerged inside the water tank with the wings sticking out, because there was no water tank big enough to put a whole plane inside. So they had to build one. And they went through its cycles. And as the cycles went through, I think it was a couple of cycles in, all of a sudden, crack opened. The whole tank, the whole fuselage exploded. Water rushed in, and they figured it out. So what happened was, it was the windows on the original DH-106. The windows were square, just like on your phone, on your iPhone or your Samsung phone. The windows were square. They didn't have the little rounded edges on the corner of the wind. It was an actual square window, like a piece of paper. It was like that. So what happened was, is as the aircraft would go through pressurization and you're going up to altitude, the plane actually expands. Okay, and it's those overlapping aluminum sheets have to hold. So, like, if you look at an airplane when it's built, you know, you got the rivets, right? But the windows are round. So your round window on your airliner, okay, is there for a reason, because of the DH-106. I'll show you a photo of it. Oops. Oh, this is the 106 right here. You can barely see a photo of it. But if you go online, type in DH-106, and I'll put a link in the description box below, you'll be able to see what the Comet looked like. You can go on airliners.net also, which is a great forum where you can find lots of different aircraft. Airliners.net, you can find a lot of different, type in an Air Comet, and you'll be able to type one up. That's where they found out what happened with the airplanes. They were cracking open and like an egg, and the plane would just get destroyed. It was sad that they had so many people die just for that to be able to be found that way. So, getting back, the de Havilland Comets, they flew up until the 4C models. Final production version was a stretched fuselage. It carried more people. And the 4B with the wing of the 4, of the very first one, the 4 Comet. The first of the 3 for Mexicana were used for certification and development flying, and had its maiden flight on 31 October 1959. Companies that actually flew the aircraft were Argentina's Airlines, Aerolíneas Argentina, East African Airways, King Saudi Airlines. Oh, the King of Saudi Arabia had one. He had it as a private jet. Kuwait Airlines, they had 2. Middle East Airlines, which were 4. Mizrahi they had 9. The Royal Aircraft Establishment 1. The Royal Air Force had 5, and Sudan Airways had 2. Sudan Airways, actually, if you look around, I think they flew theirs up until like the 1960s, almost 1970s. Though the aircraft didn't do well commercially because of those accidents, it did live on in the Nimrod. The British Nimrod was a maritime patrol aircraft. The British Air Force and the British Navy needed a submarine hunter, and the Comet was available. So the British royalty went ahead and used the aircraft. They modified the plane. They extended the bottom of. They basically gave it a longer fuselage. It was the 4 that were used. The 3 and the 4 were used, and they basically added bomb bay doors so they could carry torpedoes. They could carry different types of munitions on board. Depth charges, listening devices for submarines, and they used a lot of sophisticated radio equipment on board. It was Britain's advanced early warning naval maritime patrol plane. It was used, I believe the Nimrods were used in the Falklands War. And the last Nimrod really to fly was the Nimrods were flying all the way into the early 2000s. They were used during the first Gulf War for maritime patrol over the Persian Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz and along the Suez Canal. During the early Iran-Iraq War, the Iran-Iraq War, where they were fighting over the Persian Gulf, they were used extensively to patrol that area and to help the Harriers find the gunboats. The aircraft had a very successful career as a maritime patrol aircraft. There were one or two accidents. There was one that was pretty interesting, very famously. It was even caught on video. It was flying over the Great Lakes, and as the aircraft did a hard bank, you had which was called wing stall. The actual plane started to sink. When he turned, the plane went straight into the water and killed all on board. You can look that up, and I think you can actually see the video. It's pretty tough to watch, but again, you get to see what the Nimrod could do. Nimrod actually flew like a fighter plane. A lot of pilots, some pilot crews actually said you could bank the aircraft like a fighter. The engines were the same. The same engines that were on it were the Rolls-Royce Avon 524 turbojets. Wingspan on this aircraft was 114 feet. Length of the aircraft overall was 111 feet, 6 inches. And the height from the wheel to the top of the tail was a total of 29 feet, 6 inches. So it was a really pretty aircraft to look at. Again, you can go on airliners.net. I'll put a link in the description box below so you can follow and you can actually see what the Nimrod looked like and all the different paint schemes that they had. They had some pretty interesting paint schemes. If you want to build a model of it, I don't believe they have an RC version. I'm sure they do. We'll see if we can find it on our zone, and if I find it on our zone, I'll stick it in the link description box below. But if you want to build a plastic model of it, Airfix a while ago, you'll be able to find one on eBay if you unless they're still building the kit. I built one, and Airfix made a kit of the Nimrod, and I built it, and I actually had it for a while. When I went through move, I lost the kit. It kind of broke up in the move. The only problem with that kit was that you had to display the airplane on a base. If you were going to display the aircraft sitting on its wheels, you couldn't open the bomb bay because the plane sat so low to the ground. And when the Nimrod was operating in the theaters of operation, like the Gulf War, when they had to load the bomb bay with the sophisticated equipment, they had to swing the doors up so you could get up underneath the aircraft because the bomb bay doors, the belly of the plane actually sat really low to the ground. It wasn't like the P-3 Orion, the Lockheed P-3 Orion Electra 2, that the bomb bay was a little higher up because the plane was built differently. Excuse me. Moving along, DH-108 was a built to Air Ministry specifications. It was a demonstrator type aircraft. The aircraft, there were only 2 prototypes built. It was a delta wing design, tail, delta wing, and a max airspeed was 640 miles an hour. That was Mach 1. It was really built as a demonstrator. It was destroyed. One of them was destroyed in a fatal crash, killing the pilot in 15 February 1950, as was the prototype in May 1st. So both aircraft have been destroyed. There is no type of this aircraft available. There's only pictures, and I have a photo here. There is a photo. As you can see, it's tail, and then there is a wing. It's a delta wing configuration with a single turbojet. Wingspan total was 39 feet. From the wheel to the top of the tail was 24 feet. And the engine was a de Havilland Goblin 3 turbojet. So it developed 3,300 pounds of thrust. Sorry, lost my brain there for a moment. It went on vacation, came back real quick. So it's pretty sad. The plane just didn't do well, so they only used it as a technology demonstrator. Moving along, Sea Vixen. We spoke about the Sea Vixen last week. It was a very interesting airplane to look at. EQRC, I'm sorry, I'm reading your thing. Just trying to get as much speed as they could. Yeah, they were trying to basically make as much speed as they could get out of it. I guess, the aircraft, if you look at the plane, if you look online and you type in de Havilland 108 and you look at the airplane, the tail is not very big. So I would assume, and this is the day and age before fly-by-wire. If you look at like the B-2 bomber, when it flies, the bomber doesn't have a vertical tail. So the clamshell is open constantly, and the computer is keeping the plane stable. This plane was built before that. So I'm pretty much assuming that maybe, they were squeezing as much speed out of the plane, but with I don't think the tail was really made for that type of flight. Not like the Panvea Tornado, which was, had a very large tail, but it also flew closer to the ground. It was a single seat research aircraft. Maximum takeoff weight was 8,000 pounds. I guess that was the wing and the whole body and the engine. But it first flew in 1946 and was intended to explore transonic area. So just on the envelope of Mach 1. The first aircraft actually broke up. It says here that the first aircraft actually broke up in flight, so killing the pilot. So, but he was a researcher, and we think about the plane that he flew, and he was a good man. So the de Havilland Sea Vixen, we spoke about that aircraft, but the next one I wanted to talk about is the DH-12 Venom. This was a very interesting aircraft. Same principle built as the Vampire. Okay, this is called the DH-112. The DH-112 Vampire was a very unique airplane. It was built from the Venom. The very first model flew in 1949. It was the Venom FB Mark I. Became operational in 1952. The type saw service in Germany and Near East and Far East, equipped with 19 different squadrons. The Royal New Zealand Air Force flew one, and many other companies. They were replaced by F-5s in Sweden by the mid-1980s. And there's still maybe one or two still flying in different countries. I know Sweden flies theirs. The military shows off the plane once in a while. Looking at this plane, it had a huge radar in the nose. So basically, I'm going to show you the photo here, and it's going to show you a cutout. But you're going to see the difference between the Venom and the Viper in this photo. Actually, you're going to see the Viper. You're going to see the Venom because it's a two-seater. The pilot was sitting next to you. Were sitting next to your co-pilot. It had 4 20-millimeter cannons and the precision for fire streak air-to-air missiles or bombs or 8 rockets. The performance in the aircraft, the engine that I had was the Havilland Ghost 105 turbojet. It wasn't a Mach 1 fighter, but the nose gave it away. So there we go. I mean, look at that nose. That's a big nose. You just basically don't look at the nose. Look at everything else of the aircraft. That's how big the plane is. Yeah, they're. Oh, really? You found one? They're selling one for $120,000. Let's break open the piggy bank. I'm sure it costs more to maintain the plane than to own it. That's how much. Just maintaining it, sitting on the ground and looking at it, you're basically writing a check. The initial production version of was for the RAF. Then the second version, which was the Mark II, was a night fighter version. Incorporated a newer fuselage than the Mark I. The French built this. They also had a version called the Sea Venom. Was a Mark 53 designed for Sea Venom service with the Royal Australian Navy, generally similar to the Sea Venom for the British Air Force. It was just a really big nose. But yeah, it was a revolutionary design for that aircraft. Still the same small tail as the Venom. I'm sorry, as the Vampire, but just a bigger plane. And when it saw service with the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy, they had vents in the intake, so to lessen the amount of FOD that would come inside. Next one I'm going to talk about is the Havilland 114 Heron. EQRC. What was the top speed of this plane? Oh yeah, let's tell you what the top speed is. I got it here. Maximum speed was 575 miles an hour, just shy of Mach 1. Ceiling was 40,000 feet, and the range was 705 miles. To the T, I guess. I'm sure you could stretch it a little bit longer. You could get maybe 800 miles out of it if you leaned it out a little bit on the jet fuel. Service ceiling was 40,000 feet. Climb rate was 5,700 feet per minute. That's pretty not bad for a plane like that. Unlike the Vampire, the Venom had wing tanks, because of course the engine would be sucking more fuel. Yeah, it was nice numbers for it. Very nice numbers for that plane. I think, if you build an RC version of this and put like a little, the body has enough room to put a battery in it. And I think, if you go over to Fat Guy Flies RC, he has a review. I think he has one in his stash of stuff that either E-Flight or Dynam Aircraft actually put out a model of this plane. And I think you could maybe you could still find it used on eBay and fly it. But it's a really cool little airplane. Just to look at it is really cool. So next one I'm moving on to is the 114 Heron. Now, we spoke about the Dove. The Heron is the 4-engine. It's a little bit bigger. It's a bigger airplane. And the fuselage is bigger also. This plane was actually in a couple of movies. Famously, it was in a movie with Robin Williams. Very funny movie. If you ever get a chance to watch it, called Club Paradise. The Robin Williams plays a retired firefighter. He decides to give it all up because he doesn't want to get killed in the line of duty. He uses his retirement money and goes and buys a hotel in a Caribbean island. Um, Pretends that, the basically puts out false advertising that the place is great and they've got this jet, but it's actually the Heron. The Heron brings in the passengers, and as the pilot is coming in, he runs out of gas. And what happens throughout the whole movie, it's very fun. But that scene is pretty funny as it's coming in, and it's a really good movie to watch. If you just want to watch something funny, it's pretty funny. It's like I said, it's got Puerto Rican Airlines had one. Pin Air, yep, was also a major operator with more than 20 Heron aircraft. It was a, you know what? It wasn't a bad airplane. It was a really good plane. The de Havilland 114, I'm going to read it right from here from the book. The de Havilland DH-114 Heron. Simplicity and reliability were the key notes for the new aircraft, which provided accommodations for a crew of 2. So you had the pilot and the co-pilot, and you could carry 14 passengers. And if you take the toilet out, and you don't use the provision, you don't need those provisions, you could carry 2 more passengers. So make sure, so when you got on the plane, they basically told you, make sure you take a tinkle before you get on board. And then we're flying to the islands because there's no bathroom on board the plane. So for those 2 extra passengers, it was Ryanair, or Spirit Airlines. The first production Heron 1 was acquired by New Zealand National Airways. Then there was the Heron 2. The very first aircraft, do they even say where it flew? Oh, here we go. The very first one flew on 10 May 1950. Bunch of different companies used the aircraft. 2 were used for VIP for the Queen. So the Queen actually flew on this aircraft. I'm sure she didn't fly on it very much. The Royal Navy used one called the Sea Heron. And they were ex-civil versions of the Heron 2s and 3s, and they were acquired in 1961. Performance, cruise speed for this aircraft was 8,000 feet. That's it. It was it was an airplane to like go long distance with. Cruising speed was 183 miles an hour, so it wasn't very, very fast. The power plants on the aircraft was the Havilland Gypsy Queen 32 inline piston engines. So the plane wasn't really fast either. But there were 4 of them. Empty weight was 8,150 pounds. Takeoff weight was 13.5. I'm going to show you guys a picture of this plane. This one is painted, the cross section is called Baja Cortez Airlines. There you see the plane right there. Oh, well, it's not this one right here. Oops, let's go this way. There it is. So it looks a little bit like the Dove, but it's got 4 engines, and just basically it was replaced by the Vickers Viscount. Of course, you were going to go a little bit faster and burn more fuel, but you were able to fly at 42,000 feet in the Vickers. Another cool airplane. Very, very interesting aircraft there. Moving along. So de Havilland had broken up into 3 different companies by this time. You had the Havilland UK, okay, and then Canada had a de Havilland Corp, which was de Havilland Canada, and all their airplanes were DHCs. So it'd be de Havilland Canada, DHC. And then Australia had a version of the company also. It was also known as DHA. The DHA, it was a DHA 3. Okay. It was a tri-motor aircraft. It had 3 Avro Lycoming engines on it. They were flat 4-piston props. It was the Havilland Australia to Drover. It was called Drover. It was 8-seat light transport was chosen. The Drover was based broadly on the DH-104 Dove. So it was based on the Dove. So everything that Australia built for this plane was based on the Dove. The only difference was the nose had an extra engine, and the engines were different. They were Lycomings. They weren't Gypsies. They were flat 4 engines, and they were a 4-cylinder engine, so it had very little horsepower. Only 180 horses. That's basically a Honda Civic. Maximum speed for the aircraft was 158 miles an hour, cruising at a speed of 140 miles an hour, so you weren't cruising very fast. And if you were loaded, I'm sure it even dropped off more. Service ceiling was 20,000 feet. So I hope it had a pressurized cabin. It was used in the Royal Flying Doctor Service. Carried 2 medical staffs. Not many of them flew. There was the first Drover prototype flew on 23 January 1948. Versions offered variable and fixed pitch propellers. So the props would be able to move based, and that helped out with fuel economy and such. 20 aircraft had been built when production ended in 1953. Only 20 of the planes were built. It's kind of sad. Customers for the Drover included Qantas Airlines, Trans-Australian Airlines, Fiji Airways. Last being only export customer was Royal Flying Doctor Services. I'll show you a photo of it. So you can pull up, I'll put a link for it, DHA3 Drover. Very interesting looking plane. I don't know. You know what it is Australia always puts out some really weird looking airplanes. You guys ever heard of I think it was a truck. It was a company in Australia that built this plane, and it looks like basically a flying goblin. It's actually the ugliest looking airplane you'd ever see, but it was built for a purpose. It was built for agricultural use. Pilot sits on top with whatever cargo's on the bottom. If you watch the movie Mad Max Beyond the Thunderdome, there's actually one inside the plane, inside the movie. Very, very funky looking airplane. So that, I don't know. To have it in Australia, hats off to you guys. You tried your best, but it was a weird plane. And it didn't do very well either, unfortunately. So the Havilland Canada, DHC, they built what was called the Chipmunk. I saw one of these when I worked at the airport and the FBO. There were a couple of common Chipmunks made. There were the 2-seat versions. There was a single-seat version. There was a guy who actually competed one in the 1980s, and he actually died in the plane during a stunt. It was called the Super Chipmunk. It had a bigger engine in it. So it was basically a trainer version with it was the Tiger Moth with a low wing. It had the tail looked like the Havilland Mosquito. I'm going to show you a photo of it, and then we're going to talk about the plane. There's the plane right there. Can't really see a really good photo of it, but we'll put a link, and that way you can find it. But if you're looking at these up while we're looking through here and talking about it, you can see other. So de Havilland Canada built the Gypsy Major 1C and only partially aerobatic design. So the very first aircraft flew in 1946, Toronto on 22 May 1946. It was tandem seat and stressed skin monoplane. So basically the skin, it had a skin covering on it, just like the Spearman did. It was basically stretched fabric over a monocoque fuselage, which was tubes and things like that. And they used dope to stretch the skin out. There was quite a number of different models. There was the 1B, 1B2, and then the Chipmunk version. There were Mark 20s, Mark 21s. There was a two-seat conversion one, powered for agricultural spraying. So the plane was widely used as an agriculture plane, which was either a single-seater or a two-seater, or as a trainer in the Royal Canadian Air Force. There are some that show up on the air show circuit. The one that came to the airport was actually bought in Canada and brought down. The gentleman was bringing it down to our neck of the woods to give it a new lease on life and be flying around on the air show circuit. Probably during Sun and Fun, we'll probably be able to see one. If not, anybody that's close to an air show, you'll probably be able to see one show up at one of your local air shows. Here's a perfect example of it sitting in the two-seat version. Take a look at see the tail on it? If you look at the tail is the same tail as the Mosquito and as the Sea Hornet. So that tail is very distinctive of de Havilland. Last week we spoke about the de Havilland Beaver. We didn't speak too much about the de Havilland C3 Otter. The Otter was the bigger version of the Beaver. I mean, it was a tankier version. You had the DC-2 and you had the DC-3. The DC-3 was a bigger plane. DC-2 was a little bit skinnier. The de Havilland Otter was a much bigger aircraft, bigger radial motor on it. It was used extensively by the Air Force and the Navy as a liaison and troop carrying airplane into small remote areas. It had the same wing style stall version. Nice color combo, exactly. Nice color combo. The Otter was literally the Havilland Beaver. I think we spoke about Never Cry Wolf. Really nice movie. You really got to go watch that movie. But it's a really pretty movie. Don't watch it on Disney. Rent the movie. You can watch it on Amazon, I believe. You can rent it on there. The Havilland Canada built the DHC-3 Otter. The DH-3 Otter had a Pratt & Whitney R1340 Wasp radio, and which was initially known as the King Beaver. So there was the Beaver and then the King Beaver. So the Otter was really the King Beaver, but later they changed it to the Otter. Later models came out with a turbo. They had a PT6 turbine engine on it. It was a PT6A 27, replacing the standard Wasp engine. It was a Stoll utility transport, and performance max speed on I'm sure with the turbo it was a lot faster, but it says here cruising speed was max speed was 153 miles an hour. I think that was with the piston. Service ceiling was 18,000 feet. That's pretty high up. They don't show what the mileage, how fast the plane was with an economy cruising of 121 miles per hour. They don't talk about the turbo. I'm sure the turbo was a little bit faster, but you had probably more weight on the plane because of that turbo engine. In Canada, they fly a lot of them. There's still quite a number of them still flying. They called it the Immortal Beaver. Yeah, they refurbished one from Arizona. The Beavers are flying more so than the Turbo Otter, or the King Beaver. There was not a lot of King Beavers made. In the book here, it only talks about there were 460 of them built, including 66 for the Royal Canadian Air Force and 227 for the U.S. Armed Services. Let me show you a photo of it. It looks like a Howard. Oops. There's a cross section of it. And there's a photo. So if you go online and just type in DHC-3 Otter, you'll pull up some photos of the plane. I'm sure they have some in Alaska flying. And you'll be able to see some with some really nice colors on them. Next one we're going to talk about is the DHC de Havilland, Canada still. De Havilland, UK is, not really building any airplanes anymore. DHC-4 Caribou. This aircraft saw extensive service with the CIA and the Army Air Corps in Vietnam. VTOL aircraft. It was basically an upgrade from the Beaver and the Otter. It was a dual engine. Had a back ramp, loading ramp door. Tail sat up high so the ramp could be utilized. The power plants on this was Pratt & Whitney R2000s, twin Wasp radials. So it was a bigger motor. Max cruise speed was 200. Excuse me. Was 216 miles per hour. Excuse me. Cruise speed at altitude was 182 at 7,500 feet. When I showed you the picture of the Otter, it was the aircraft right below it. This one right here. This is the prototype version. Very cool airplane. If you pull up a documentary called The Keybird, it was a B-29 that was frozen in time on the Greenland ice flat. And they actually show the aircraft being used to bring in these radial engines. They had to go and they tried to save this B-29 from a frozen lake bed, and the plane ended up burning down because of the gentleman who got the aircraft. He was taxiing the plane around, and the plane was not ready for takeoff, and he shouldn't have really been playing around with a plane like that. But I guess he wanted to see if he could fly it out. Something happened in the back of the plane, and the plane catches fire. But listen, you know what? You got to watch the video. It's a really cool video. They talk about it, and subsequently, it would have been really nice to see that B-29 back up in service. It flew with the U.S. Air Force until its crash, and then it was written off. Very sad. Though I do know there's the Doc B-29 still flying. Fifi is grounded because of some landing gear issues. She'll be back in the air maybe in the next 2 years, or maybe after we make new parts for the landing gear. And Kermit Weeks, I know, has a B-29. I'm not sure if he still has it. If anybody maybe can reach out to him and find out, is he going to get his B-29 up and running? Then, we'll see that one come up, and then there'll be 3 B-29s in the air. So the Caribou, getting back to it, there were no turbine versions of this aircraft ever created. Like I said, it was really popular with the CIA because the airplane could land literally on the side of a mountain, and you could bring rice, and you could bring other things included. You could put a Jeep in the back, and then fly it in and out of unimprovised runways on the tops of a mountain. De Havilland built bush planes in Canada. So every de Havilland aircraft that came out of Canada was, technically speaking, a bush aircraft. Canada, everything north of Toronto, you're in the middle of the woods. I think Edmonton is the biggest city north, getting closer to the polar ice cap. But a lot of the big cities, there's not that many big cities after Edmonton. Oh, good night. Good night, roadmap to reality. So the aircraft was a very interesting plane. And I'm sure if you look on YouTube, you can just type in DHC-4 Caribou. You'll find some really cool videos. There's a lot of videos online about this plane. And there are still some flying in the air show circuit. There's actually a video on Airshow, YouTube site, of the plane landing at Oshkosh. And I think it would be a kind of cool airplane to own. You could put some seats in it, maybe some turn it into a flying camper, which was very popular back in the 60s. They would take old transports and fly. You would turn it into a flying camper of sorts, and you could take people around. Colin, good evening. Welcome. Haven't seen you in a while. Hope your Easter was a great one. So the Havilland DH-4C was a unique plane. It was very unique. The Malaysian Air Force used it. So I'm going to read directly from the book here. This is why I like books. Books are better than Wikipedia. That's a fact. So the first batch was the 2A in 1962, designation 2A, talking about the Caribou. As a result of its evaluation, the first 5 aircraft the U.S. Army adopted the Caribou as standard equipment and placed orders for 159 aircraft. So that's a lot. The second batch of aircraft was designated the CV-2B following tensions on the border between China and India. The U.S. Army handed over 2 Caribous to the Indian Air Force in early 1963. In January of 1967, the 134 Caribous still in service with the U.S. Army were transferred to the U.S. Air Force charge as C-7As and C-7B transports. The aircraft was general sales success, and examples flew not only with air forces throughout the world, but also with civilian operators in the Canadian services. The Caribou was replaced by the DHC Buffalo. Surplus examples were sold to a number of nations, including Colombia, Oman, Tanzania, and many other nations around the world. The United Nations even bought a couple. Production ended for the Caribou in 1973, 1 year before I was born. I was born in 74. But on production line, the number 24, the two models were very similar apart from later models. Increase in weight, maximum takeoff weight for the DHC-4 being 26,000 pounds. Man, that's a lot of weight. You could put that's like almost, you could put two cars inside. Well, you could put a car inside plus the airplane. Maximum speed was 216 miles an hour. Cruising speed was 182. I think I already said that. The altitude. So, wow. Dimensions. The aircraft had a 95-foot wingspan. The length of the body was 72 feet. Yeah, 72 feet. Wow, that was a big plane. And the height from the nose wheel to the top of the tail was 31 feet. A big plane. Yep. Join on the yard work. Lots of yard work today. There was a lot of yard work that was done today. Okay, moving right along. We're going to move a little longer here because we're already at 2 hours here, going into another 30 minutes. The de Havilland Buffalo was the replacement for the Caribou. The Buffalo was the DHC-5 Buffalo. It was a turboprop version, and it was T-tailed. Same wingspan, same body style, just a totally different engine power plant size on the aircraft. This is the plane right here. And again, so the Havilland DH-5 Buffalo was STOL transportation model. Top speed was 261 miles an hour at 10,000 feet. So it was a really good aircraft. There were a lot of different models that were built, and the aircraft saw extensive service around the world. Tanzania, Sudan, Mexico, Kenya, Mauritania, just to name a few of the countries that actually flew the plane. So the plane did very well. Not many RC planes made of this aircraft, but if anybody wants to build one, I'm sure you can find plans for it. The one that we have seen that is now being used a lot extensively, and we have seen RC models of it. Actually, I got one right above me, is the Otter, the Twin Otter. There's float versions of it. The plane is being widely used. Coming up soon is, we spoke about the Havilland Mosquito, where I'll touch base on it really quickly just before we end the video. The Twin Otter is used still today. It's got turboprops on it. As a matter of fact, the paint scheme on this one is from NOAA. They operate one, and they do even touch and goes. If you look on my scroll feed, you can actually see one doing touch and goes. I videotaped it when it was working. The aircraft is used extensively as a private aircraft. There's float versions, like I said, and there's turboprop versions, and it was mostly a turboprop aircraft. Max payload on it would be 22,500 pounds, and you could fly up to 806 miles on that plane. It used Pratt & Whitney PT6 A27 props. You could actually get ones with scimitar props, would be basically make one that was a lot quieter. The plane is used all over the world. Many different countries use the aircraft. They're even flown into remote areas like the base of Mount in the Himalayan mountains and Mount Everest at the base of runway there in Mount Everest. St. Martin, all the islands use the aircraft. There's seaplane versions of this plane being used. So this plane is very widely used all over the world. Next one is the Havilland DHC-7, which is the Dash 7. It is the Twin Otter, 4 motors. So Asian Pacific Airlines uses the aircraft. There are still some flying today, but a lot of them have really come out of service. They had 4 PT6 motors on them. There were PT6 A50 turboprops, each flat rated. And the service ceiling on these aircraft was 21,000 feet. So DHC-7s and Dash 7. The last of them was the Dash 8. The Dash 8 is still highly used. As a matter of fact, there's a video online that you can see the Dash 8 taking off in a crosswind. I'm going to show you a cross-section of the Dash 7. If you haven't seen one already, if you go to airliners.net, you can see one. There it is, a Dash 7. Very beautiful paint scheme on it. There's quite a number of different airlines that have the Dash 7. You were talking, Colin, you're asking about the Mosquito. The Mosquito was the wooden wonder of de Havilland. It was built out of plywood. What they did is they actually glued multiple layers of plywood together and formed the body using heat and steam to form those complex sheets on it. There was another aircraft that was actually built in the plywood version, which was the Sea Hornet, which we spoke about in the very first of the video. The aircraft flew the Mosquito, and the Sea Mosquito was also used in. It was a really amazing aircraft. So there were quite a different number of versions. There was the fighter version, which had the machine guns in the front. There was the bomber version. There was the sea version, which could carry a torpedo on the belly of the plane. And then there was the Sea Hornet. Excuse me. The Sea Hornet was twin Merlins, single seat airplane. If you go to the beginning of the video, you'll be able to see it there. A really cool looking airplane. Unfortunately, I don't think they made many any kits about it. Colin, if you're making a de Havilland Mosquito, I think Gillows put out a kit of that aircraft. So really cool plane. I just wish de Havilland had made a bigger model of it. I think that would have been a great plane, like in 1/24 scale with the balsa wood. But if you go on outer zone, you could blow the plans up and make a bigger plane. Yeah, you could definitely make a bigger plane. You'd have to you would probably have to finicky the cowlings, but that would be a really cool looking airplane. Flight Test has a model of the DH of the de Havilland Mosquito. If you go to Flight Test in their store, they have foam board cutout of that plane, and you can make one into an RC version. So the DH-98 Mosquito very first flew in 1938, and it was built all of plywood, which was very hard to pick up on radar, not to say. So it was a radar absorbing material. But it did have metal in the aircraft, so it did give it away. But revolutionary design. It was called the Wooden Wonder for a reason. But that's tonight's show. And we have done it almost an hour and a half. I'm very tired, guys. I did yard work today, and as you can see, I'm a little sunburned from being outside. One thing I'm going to say is to let you all know, we did start a Patreon. If you're just catching on, I started a Patreon page. In the Patreon page, I'll be doing some exclusive stuff. I have a Rumble account. The thing is I can't be the Rumble account. I'm basically taking these videos and putting them on Rumble, and I'm downloading these onto my phone and then transferring them to Rumble. And they on Rumble, I don't do anything live. The only time I'll ever do anything live on Rumble is if I start to talk about the Bay of Pigs invasion, which I really do want to do that video and talk a little bit with my dad, because he lived that day when the CIA-backed rebels flew into the Bay of Pigs. I want to get his perspective and talk to him about it, and you guys will be able to see that video. I'll put that will probably go on Rumble, because I'll be touching on some subjects that I don't think YouTube will really want to hear. But we'll put it here also. It's a different perspective than what you see online from other people when you get a story from the actual persons that were there during that historical time. My dad also did a lot of business travel around the world, and he flew on very different aircraft. And I want to talk to him about that. So I'm hoping that in the next couple of weeks, when he comes to visit, we can sit down and him and I can have a chat. It won't be a live video, but you can watch it on playback. The uncut version will be on my Patreon channel. It's $5 a month. It helps me not only put out some content that you guys will really like to listen to, get maybe a different perspective from the actual persons. I know some pilots, and I would love to talk to them about their experiences in flying certain aircraft. And I would really like to share that with y'all. But it'll be very interesting, and I hope you guys can help out and help me out in the channel. Colin, you put out a video about your T-28 Trojan. I shared it with some other pages that I follow on Facebook. Also, just to let you guys know, there is a Facebook page, Model Man Frank. I don't really do too much on it. You can follow it if you want to on Facebook. And yeah, just to help you out a little bit. I know you get a lot of views from that, and you know what? You get some more followers. I always like to help out some of my anybody that follows me. I like to help them out a little bit if they put out nice content, and you do too. So, love to see if you do get a mosquito body and decide to build one. I really would love to see you do a whole video on that. That'd be kind of cool to watch. I don't use, yeah, you know what? The only time I use Facebook is my RC club has a Facebook page, and I'm the moderator on that. So yeah, that's the only reason I use Facebook. But yeah, we're going to use mostly the Patreon page. And if you guys want to follow us on Patreon, it would be greatly help me out, and helps me out in creating the content. Building models, airplanes nowadays is getting pretty expensive, and there's a lot of stuff that I like to do, and kind of spread this wonderful hobby. It is a great hobby and a great career. I've been very blessed in this aspect. All right, guys, it's been a long show, and Colin, being that you're joining us a little late, I'm sure you just hadn't said hello, but that's okay. Anybody who watches this on playback, again, if you want to follow me on Patreon and help out with the cause, it's $5 a month. I won't raise it any higher than that for right now. And you get you get a little bit exclusive content on that page, and we'll see how it goes. With all that said, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Next week, we're going to talk about Boeing aircraft. Mostly, we're going to talk about the airline versions. Everybody talks about the fighter type side of Boeing. You know, everybody knows about what's going on now, and we're really not going to touch too much about that. We'll touch a little bit, but we're going to talk about their early airliner stuff. Boeing 314s and the 737 when it first started out, 727s, the MD-80s, because Boeing during the 1990s took over McDonnell Douglas and came out with the Boeing 717. We'll talk a little bit about the Dreamliner and the 747, which is the queen of the skies. Until next week. Again, Boeing aircraft we'll be talking about, and we'll talk about some stuff in the shop, specifically my Club Cup. Watch out for the videos, guys, and thanks for joining us on tonight's podcast, Shop Talk. Model Man Frank out. Have a good night, guys.